The night I walked through that front door, I wasn't the same person who had left it 10 years ago. In fact, I was someone entirely different, someone stronger, smarter, and far more determined. But back then, I had been kicked out, thrown away like an unwanted possession, my family's words echoing in my ears as I stood there, shocked and broken. "You'll never amount to anything," they said. "Get out of here. We don't want you." The pain of those words cut deep, but little did they know that I would carry that pain with me, transforming it into something far more powerful than they could ever imagine. I walked away that day with nothing but the clothes on my back and the burning desire to prove them wrong. It wasn't easy. For years, I struggled, faced rejection, and had to build everything from scratch. The road was rough, filled with hardships, but with every obstacle I grew. And now, 10 years later, I was ready to face them again. I had changed. I was no longer the scared, helpless kid who had begged for their love and approval. I was someone who had learned to stand on my own, who had fought every battle life threw at me and emerged victorious. The question was, would they even recognize me? Or would they see me as the same person they had kicked out all those years ago? I didn't know, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to leave until they knew exactly who I had become. This time, it would be on my terms, and they were about to regret everything they'd ever done to me. The air in the house had always smelled of stale coffee and the faint, distant sound of arguments, as if the walls themselves were keeping secrets. I'd grown up in this house, but it never felt like a home. From a young age, I felt like an outsider, a mere spectator in the lives of my family members. My parents, always too busy with their own lives, never truly saw me. I was just the child that happened to exist under their roof, taking up space they didn't know what to do with. My brother, on the other hand, was their golden child, the one they loved, the one they'd pour all their attention and energy into. In a way, I envied him. But that envy didn't last long. You see, it wasn't just that I felt invisible, it was that I felt unwanted. I remember the day they kicked me out like it was yesterday. It was a rainy evening, and the usual tension had thickened the air that day. The words had come like a blow to the stomach, unexpected and cruel. "You're nothing but a burden," my father had said, his voice cold and firm. "You've taken up enough of our time and resources. Go figure it out on your own." I stood there, frozen, as my mother turned away and my brother said nothing. They didn't even look back as I gathered what little I had. All those years of trying to gain their approval, trying to be good enough, trying to make them proud, none of it mattered in the end. They had made their decision, and I was out. The first few months after I left were the hardest. I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I ended up in a small apartment in a rundown part of the city, barely able to afford rent and living on scraps. I worked several minimum wage jobs, did whatever I could to make ends meet. I had nothing but my sheer determination to prove them wrong. I didn't need their love or approval. I would find my own path. It wasn't long before I met people who would change my life. One of them was Carla, a waitress at the diner where I worked. Carla was older, with a kind face and a no-nonsense attitude. She could see through the facade I put up, the tough exterior that shielded me from the world. "You're too hard on yourself," she'd say every time I got down on myself after a tough day. "You're doing fine. You're tougher than you know." She was right. Little by little, I started to believe her. I started to push myself harder, work longer hours, learn new skills. I had never believed in myself before, but I was beginning to change. I made my first real friend in years, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Carla's encouragement kept me going, reminding me that I wasn't just fighting for survival, I was fighting for a future. Then there was Jake. Jake was a part-time mechanic I met when my car broke down, and his easy smile and laid-back attitude quickly won me over. He wasn't just a friend, he became family. I would stop by his shop after work, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. He was the first person who actually believed in me when I couldn't even believe in myself. He told me I was smart, capable, and more than just the sum of my failures. "You're not your past," he would always say. "What happened before doesn't define you. You're writing your own story now." Jake's words stuck with me, echoing in my mind when I was struggling to find my way. With his help and the support of others, I started taking on bigger projects. I even went back to school at night, something I'd never considered before. My dreams of a better life began to feel real. I remember one day, after landing a contract for a major client, I walked into Jake's shop, grinning like a fool. "I did it," I said, showing him the paperwork. "I got the contract. It's all mine." Jake's grin spread wider. "I knew you could do it. I told you, you're something special." But as my life started to turn around, I couldn't forget what had happened. I couldn't shake the thought of my family. I hadn't spoken to them in years, not since the day they had kicked me out. Part of me had wanted to reach out, to fix things, to reconcile. But the deeper part of me, the part that had fought tooth and nail to rebuild my life, couldn't bring myself to do it. There were times I questioned my decision to leave. Did I make the right choice? Could things have been different if I'd stayed and tried harder to win their love? But each time that doubt crept in, I remembered the years of silence, the rejection, the feeling of being discarded. They didn't deserve to have me back. They didn't deserve to see the person I had become. And yet, the desire to show them, to prove to them that I was more than they ever thought I could be, kept gnawing at me. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing them I had made something of myself, with or without their support. I knew that when I returned, it wouldn't be an easy conversation. My family wouldn't just accept me with open arms. No, there would be tension. There would be resentment. But there was also something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a feeling that they, too, had changed over the years. Maybe, just maybe, they'd regret how they treated me. Maybe they'd see what I had built with my own hands and realize that the person they had kicked out wasn't the same one who was standing at their door now. I didn't know what would happen when I walked back into that house after 10 long years. But one thing was certain, they would remember my name. And they would regret every word they had ever spoken to me. The decision to return wasn't easy. After years of building my life from the ground up, returning to the family I had left behind felt like walking into a storm. But it was a storm I had been preparing for, one I knew would come sooner or later. I had spent the last decade learning to trust myself, to stand tall despite the failures and heartaches of the past. But nothing prepared me for what it would be like to face them again. I arrived at the house on a crisp autumn morning. The leaves crunched under my feet as I walked up the familiar path, every step reminding me of the years I had spent running away from this place, and the years I had spent dreaming of one day returning, not as the person they had rejected, but as someone who had built a life worth something. The house looked almost exactly the same as it had when I left. The faded blue paint on the porch, the worn-out welcome mat, the overgrown hedge that my father used to trim every summer, everything was just as it had been. But nothing about the house felt welcoming anymore. It felt like a museum, a relic from a past that no longer held any meaning for me. As I stood at the doorstep, my heart raced. A small part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to walk away from the painful memories that awaited me inside. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I had to face them, for better or for worse. I rang the doorbell. Seconds stretched into eternity as I waited, and just as I was about to turn away, the door creaked open. There, standing in front of me, was my mother. She looked older, of course, everyone does after 10 years, but there was something about her that seemed so distant. The warmth that I once sought from her was gone, replaced with a guarded, cautious look. She took a step back, eyes widening in disbelief. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" For a moment I stood there, silent, the weight of all those years pressing down on me. I could feel the bitterness rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't here to fight. I wasn't here to scream at her for everything she had put me through. I was here to show her who I had become, and maybe, just maybe, she would finally see me as something more than the child she had cast aside. "I came to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Can I come in?" Her eyes flickered with hesitation, but she stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The house smelled the same, a mix of pine-scented air freshener and stale furniture. I didn't know what I had expected, but it wasn't this. I had thought maybe she'd be different, that time apart might have softened the edges of her rejection. But the coldness in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was still the same woman who had told me to leave all those years ago. "Your father's not home," she said, leading me into the living room. "He's at work. And your brother, he's busy too." It stung, hearing her mention them so casually, as though they had all just moved on without a second thought. But I couldn't focus on that. I had to focus on why I was here, to confront the people who had shaped me, for better or worse, and to make them see that I wasn't the same person they had cast out. I sat down on the couch, and for a long moment, there was nothing but silence between us. My mother avoided my gaze, fiddling with the hem of her sweater, clearly uncomfortable. "I've been doing well," I said, breaking the silence. "I've built a life for myself. I've worked hard to get here. I've made something of myself." Her eyes flickered up to meet mine, but there was no warmth in her expression, only something that resembled indifference. "I'm sure you have," she said quietly. "But I don't understand. Why are you here after all these years?" The question stung. It was as if she didn't even see me, as if all the progress I had made, all the pain I had endured, meant nothing. I wasn't sure if she had always been this distant, or if her rejection had scarred me in a way that made me see her this way. But in that moment, it didn't matter. I was here now, and I wasn't leaving until I had my answers. "I'm here because I want you to understand," I said, my voice firmer this time. "I want you to understand that the person you kicked out isn't the same person who's standing here now. You made me leave, but I've built something. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. But I want you to know what you lost." Her gaze softened, but there was still hesitation in her eyes. "We didn't lose anything," she replied. "We didn't want you to leave, but you did," I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "You didn't want me, and you made that very clear. I don't expect you to understand what it's been like for me. I don't expect you to understand the years I've spent trying to build a life without any support. But that's what I've done." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she was going to say something else. Apologize, maybe. But instead, she just sat there, eyes lowered, as though she couldn't bear to meet my gaze any longer. "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "I need to speak with him too." My mother sighed, standing up slowly. "He's in his study. But I'm not sure if he's ready for this, for you to be here." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, standing up to follow her. "I'm not running away anymore." She led me to the study, where my father sat at his desk, his back turned to the door. He was the same as I remembered, stern, focused, the same man who had driven me to the edge all those years ago. When he turned around and saw me standing there, his expression remained neutral, but I could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice as cold as I remembered. "I'm here to talk," I said, my resolve strengthening. "I'm not the person you kicked out anymore. And I'm not leaving until you understand that." The air in the room thickened with tension. The storm that had been brewing inside me for years was finally reaching its peak. But this wasn't just about confrontation. It was about something deeper. It was about standing up for myself, about showing them that I wasn't broken. I was stronger, and I was no longer afraid. They had cast me aside, but I wasn't going anywhere this time. I had a voice now, and they were going to hear it. The following days were a blur of tension and silent exchanges. The house was thick with the unspoken words, the lingering discomfort of a family that had once been everything to me but now felt like nothing more than strangers. Despite the fleeting moments of weak acknowledgement from my mother and the continued cold indifference from my father, something in me had shifted. I had expected it, had known it, but the reality of it still stung. And then, the inevitable happened. It was late afternoon when the phone call came. I had been sitting on the porch, trying to sort through my emotions, trying to make sense of everything that had happened over the last few days. I hadn't heard from my brother, and to be honest, I hadn't expected to. I had always been the one to reach out, the one to beg for his attention, for his affection, but this time, no. This time, I wasn't going to chase him. But the phone rang, and the number on the screen was his. My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver. What did he want? Why now? Was it just out of some sense of obligation, or was he finally seeing me for who I had become? My mind raced, but I forced myself to answer. Hello? There was a long pause, and then his voice came through, colder than I remembered, but still unmistakably familiar. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you need to leave. You don't belong here. You never did. His words hit me like a slap across the face. The ache that had been building in my chest since I had walked through that door, the feeling of rejection that I had hoped was behind me, came crashing back in full force. It was the same as it had always been, the same dismissiveness, the same belief that I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him, to this family. My brother, the golden child, the one they had always chosen over me. And now he was doing it again. I stood up, gripping the phone tighter as the anger, the hurt, surged through me. For so long, I had let his rejection define me. For so long, I had let this family's coldness shape my every decision, my every move. But not anymore. Not this time. You have no idea what you're talking about, I snapped, my voice shaking but strong. You don't get to tell me where I belong. You don't get to decide that for me. I've spent the last 10 years of my life building something you wouldn't even understand. I don't need your approval, and I sure as hell don't need your permission to be here. I heard him scoff on the other end of the line. You think you've done something impressive? You think you've made something of yourself? I don't know what fantasy world you're living in, but the truth is, you're still the same person who couldn't handle things, the one who ran away the minute things got tough. His words cut deeper than anything my father had said. It wasn't just rejection, it was a denial of everything I had become. Everything I had fought for. And in that moment, I could feel the walls closing in on me. The weight of the past, of everything I had tried to leave behind, was crushing me, threatening to break me again. But I refused to let it. I'm not running away this time, I said through gritted teeth. I didn't run away before either. I left because you pushed me out. You never once asked what I needed. You never once cared enough to know who I was, who I could be. I'm here because I've earned the right to be here. I'm not that scared kid anymore. I'm not your punching bag. And if you can't see that, then that's on you, not me. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. I could almost feel his hesitation, his uncertainty. It was the same pause I had heard in my father's voice a few days earlier. Was it doubt? Regret? Or was it just his inability to accept that I had changed? You don't know what it's like, he finally muttered. You don't know what we've been through. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You're right. I don't know. But you sure as hell don't know what I've been through either. I've fought for everything I have. I've built my life, piece by piece, from the ground up. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you that I deserve to be here. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. And then, as if on cue, my father's voice cut through the silence, muffled but unmistakable. Enough. I turned toward the door, heart pounding, knowing what was coming next. My father had come into the room, his presence like a dark cloud. He looked at me with an unreadable expression, his eyes narrowing as he took in the phone pressed against my ear. You've said enough, he said, his voice colder than before. I don't know what you expect, but we're not going to let you tear this family apart. Tear it apart? I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and raw. You did that. You tore it apart when you threw me out. You tore it apart when you never cared enough to fight for me. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might say something else, might finally apologize for what he had done. But then he turned away, walking back to the door. I've had enough of this, he muttered, his voice hardening again. If you want to keep fighting, then go ahead. But don't expect us to be here when it all falls apart. I stared at his retreating form, the weight of his words sinking in. But this time, there was no fear, no hesitation. Because I knew, deep down, that I wasn't here to fix them. I was here to fix myself. Turning back to the phone, I took a deep breath and finally hung up. For a moment, everything felt heavy again, like I had been carrying a burden I wasn't sure I could bear. But as I stood there, in that house that used to be my home, I realized something profound. The weight of their rejection had been my burden all these years, but now, I was finally free. For the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need them to be whole. I didn't need their love, their approval, or their validation. I had built something far more important: my own worth. I walked out of that house without a second glance. I wasn't leaving out of defeat. I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away with my head held high, knowing that I had become the person they never thought I could be, and that was enough. They might never understand. They might never accept me. But I didn't need them to. The person I had become was all I ever needed to be. And that was my victory. As I walked away from the house, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, even amidst the heavy emotions that still lingered. My legs felt like they were carrying me through thick mud, but I pressed on, not slowing down, not looking back. The cold air bit at my skin, but it didn't matter. Every step away from that place was a step closer to the life I had worked so hard to build. It was late by the time I reached the small apartment I had rented years ago, the same place that had been my refuge when I first left the family home. Walking through the door felt oddly comforting, like stepping into a cocoon of my own making. I had nothing here, no lavish decor, no fancy furnishings. Just a few mismatched pieces of furniture and the lingering scent of coffee and pine. But it was mine. Every corner of it was mine, something I had earned, something no one could take from me. I dropped my bag by the door, collapsing onto the couch. For the first time in days, I let myself sink into the quiet. It wasn't a peace I had come by easily. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from forgetting the past. No, this silence was different. It was a silence that was earned through confrontation, through standing up for myself, through finally accepting who I had become. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me from my thoughts. I stared at it for a moment, reluctant to pick it up, knowing it could be either one of them, my mother, my brother, or even my father. But I had no intention of picking up their calls, not yet. Not until I was ready. Not until I had made sense of everything that had just happened. The truth was, I had already decided that I wasn't going to let their rejection define me any longer. For years, I had lived my life in the shadow of their disappointment, striving for their approval, thinking that somehow their love would fill the empty spaces in me. But now I realized it wasn't their approval that I needed, it was my own. The phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up. It was Carla. "Hey, how are you holding up?" Her voice crackled through the line, warm and familiar, like a lifeline in the sea of uncertainty I had just walked through. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. "I don't know, Carla. It's complicated. But I'm okay. I'm more than okay, actually." There was a pause, and I could almost picture her smiling on the other end, her voice softening. "You're stronger than you think. And I'm proud of you. You've made it through the worst of it. You don't need anyone else to see that. You've built your life. You've earned it." Her words felt like a balm to the raw wound that had been reopened that afternoon. I had always doubted myself, always second-guessed my decisions, thinking that somehow their disapproval meant something about who I was. But now, I realized that their opinions didn't define my worth. I had already proven who I was, not to them, but to myself. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice steady. "I've spent so much of my life trying to make them proud. I thought if I just showed them how hard I could work, how much I could accomplish, they'd finally accept me. But it's not about them anymore. It's about me." "Exactly," Carla replied. "You've spent so much of your life running in circles, trying to gain approval from people who never truly saw you. But you see yourself now, and that's all that matters." I smiled softly, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. "Yeah, you're right. I see myself now." The conversation shifted to other things: her latest work project, a new restaurant she'd discovered, and all the mundane things that once seemed so insignificant. But as we talked, I realized just how far I had come. The things I once craved from my family, their validation, their love, had all been empty. The only love I needed was the love I had for myself. The next few days passed in a blur. My mind slowly began to untangle itself from the past, and I focused on what I could control: my work, my personal growth, and the relationships that truly mattered. I had been given a second chance, not to fix my broken family, but to rebuild my life on my own terms. I spent more time with friends like Carla and Jake, people who saw me for who I was and supported me unconditionally. I went back to my projects, tackling challenges with a newfound confidence. There were moments, of course, when the ache of rejection would creep in, but each time it did, I reminded myself that I didn't need them to validate my worth. A few weeks later, I received a letter. It was from my mother. I opened it slowly, my heart beating a little faster as I read the words she had written in neat, careful handwriting. I've been thinking about everything you said. I know I've hurt you, and I don't know if I can ever truly make up for it. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see the person you've become, and I'm proud of you. I hope someday we can find a way to rebuild what we lost. I set the letter down, feeling a mixture of emotions rise in me. There was no perfect resolution. There was no moment where everything was magically fixed. But there was an acknowledgement, a recognition that my journey had meant something, that I had grown in ways I had never thought possible. I didn't know what would come next, whether my family would ever fully accept me, or if the wounds would ever fully heal. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to. I had learned to accept myself. And that was all I needed to move forward. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me anymore. I had built a future on my own, a future that was full of promise, full of possibility. And as I moved forward, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready for it. Because I had already won. It's strange, looking back now. The person I once was feels so distant, almost like a different life, a different version of me. I can still remember the pain, the loneliness, the feeling of being discarded by the people who should have loved me the most. For years, I believed that I was broken, that I wasn't enough, that somehow I had failed them, failed myself. But the truth is, I hadn't failed. I had simply been forced to find a new way. I had been pushed out, cast aside, but I had survived. I had thrived. And the one thing that I learned through all of it, the one thing that made everything I went through worth it, is that the only approval I need is my own. When I left that house for the final time, I didn't walk away defeated. I walked away with my head held high, not because I had beaten them, but because I had beaten my own doubts. I had learned that my worth didn't come from others, it came from within. And that, more than anything, was the true victory. The future is uncertain, of course. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, and I don't know if my family and I will ever be able to rebuild what was lost. But I've learned that some things are beyond my control. All I can do is keep moving forward, keep being the person I've become, the person I've fought so hard to be. The road ahead is mine to walk, and for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of it. Because I've already faced my past, confronted my fears, and proven to myself that I am enough. I don't need their validation anymore. I have my own, and that's enough.